So picture a man in a hospital bed. He's suffering from internal bleeding, and his body is physically shutting down after this massive cocaine overdose.
Right. It's bad.
Yeah, it's really bad. He's entirely convinced his career is over. He just had a crushing box office flop, and he legitimately thinks, this is the end of the road.
Oh, yeah. He thinks he's done.
Exactly. And then the door opens. In walks his friend, an actor, who looks at him and asks a very simple question. He says, "Do you want to live or die? Because if you want to live, let's make this movie."
Wow.
He challenges him to make a kamikaze boxing film, a movie shot with absolutely zero safety net.
Right. And that friend walking through the door was Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
And the movie they went on to make, which was born out of that insane life or death ultimatum, was Raging Bull.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a huge stack of sources covering the life, the career, and the sheer stubborn survival of Martin Scorsese.
It really is a survival story, yeah.
It is, because if you think you know him, if your brain just automatically pictures the guy who makes those fast-talking violent mob movies,
The gangsters in the tailored suit.
Exactly. If that's all you see, you only have a tiny fraction of the puzzle. So today, we are unpacking the story of a deeply conflicted asthmatic kid from Little Italy who originally set out to be a priest.
Which is still wild to think about.
It's crazy, but he ended up using the motion picture camera as his confessional. This isn't just a list of his famous movies for you today. The sources frame his 60-plus-year career as this continuous, grueling wrestling match with faith, guilt, visceral violence, and honestly, the soul of America itself.
Yeah, it's a wrestling match, both physically and spiritually. I mean, he takes these massive, sweeping, universal conflicts, things like redemption, damnation, loyalty, and he distills them down.
Right.
He focuses them into these highly specific, deeply flawed men who are just navigating very closed societies.
And it all starts in a remarkably specific world, right? Because he was born in 1942, raised in Little Italy in Manhattan. His grandparents were Sicilian immigrants. But there's this one detail from the biographical sources that really stands out to me.
Oh, about his name.
Yes. The name Scorsese is actually a typo.
Yeah, it's so funny. The original family name was Scorsese.
Scorsese.
Right, which actually translates to Scottish in Italian.
That's hilarious.
I know. Somewhere along the line, someone just messed up the immigration or the birth paperwork. And so cinema history simply inherited a brand new name.
Wow. But the environment he grew up in, under that new name, it was completely defining. Because it was a tough neighborhood, but he couldn't actually participate in that toughness.
No, he had severe asthma.
Right. He physically couldn't play sports, couldn't run around the streets with the other kids without risking a severe attack.
So his parents and his older brother had to find a way to keep him safe, and occupied.
Yeah.
So they hid him away in the dark. They took him to movie theaters.
Which forces him into the role of an observer from a very young age. He's sitting in the dark, absorbing the vibrant colors and grand emotions of films like Michael Powell and Emmer Kressberger's The Red Shoes.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah. He's watching life happen on a screen because he is totally insulated from the life happening on his own street.
Exactly. But parallel to the movie theater is the other major institution of his childhood, which is the Catholic Church.
Right.
He was raised in a very strict religious environment and actually attended a preparatory seminary. Like you mentioned, his initial life goal was to become an ordained priest.
But he ends up failing out of that seminary after the first year. The rigor, or maybe just his own shifting interests, it just didn't align.
Yeah.
But looking at his trajectory, I mean, if he couldn't preach from a physical pulpit, it feels like the movie theater just became his church. And the audience became his congregation.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Is his entire filmography basically just a displaced priesthood?
Well, the sources actually heavily support that psychological reading. That theological grounding, it just never leaves him. The ritual, the profound sense of guilt, the agonizing search for redemption.
The guilt is huge.
Oh, it's everything. It all gets transferred directly into his screenplays and his camera movements. I mean, you see it in the way his characters are constantly seeking absolution.
Yeah, but not in a church.
Exactly.
Right.
Instead of looking for it in a church, they look for it in the streets, in violence, or in strict codes of criminal loyalty. Scorsese himself actually once remarked that, you don't make up for your sins in the church. You do it in the streets.
Wow. So he effectively turned the silver screen into an altar where those sins could be played out and judged.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Now, during the same formative period, there's a connection in the sources that sounds almost made up. It sounds like fiction.
The video store.
Yes. So he's a teenager living in Brooklyn, and he commutes all the way to the Bronx just to rent a specific, obscure film reel.
It was the Tales of Hoffman, right?
Exactly. There is only one copy available in the entire area, and the only other person renting that exact same reel from that exact same store is a kid named George A. Romero.
That is just wild. Two kids who would go on to fundamentally reshape American cinema, sharing a single reel of film.
And Romero, of course, goes on to invent the modern zombie genre with Night of the Living Dead, which explores entirely different facets of American decay.
Right, completely different vibe. But for Scorsese, the path leads to New York University.
Yeah, because having a vision of Catholic guilt and street-level redemption is one thing. Knowing how to actually physically thread a camera, light a scene, and cut film is a whole other beast.
Oh, absolutely.
So at NYU, he finds a mentor, an Armenian-American professor named Haig P. Manoogian.
And Manoogian is so important. He provides the academic and structural foundation. I mean, Scorsese revered him so much that he actually later dedicated Raging Bull to him.
Really?
Yeah, he called Manoogian's teachings the most precious gift he ever received. But, you know, academia only gets you so far. To survive in the industry, he had to learn the business of making movies.
Right, and that happens when he heads to Hollywood and crosses paths with Roger Corman.
A legend.
Yes, Corman is the legendary king of B-movies. He essentially hires Scorsese to make a sequel to a film called Bloody Mama, which eventually becomes the 1972 film Boxcar Bertha.
So Corman is basically the pragmatic counterweight to NYU. He teaches Scorsese how to shoot fast, how to shoot cheap, and most importantly, how to entertain a restless audience on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, because Corman's productions demanded rapid pacing and creative problem-solving. If you couldn't afford a massive set, you had to learn how to use tight editing to hide the flaws, right?
Exactly. Keep the energy up.
But then John Cassavetes enters the picture. Cassavetes, the pioneer of American independent film, watches Boxcar Bertha.
And he does not hold back.
No. He pulls Scorsese aside and basically says, "You've spent a year of your life making a piece of trash."
I mean, ouch.
Right. Brutal. But he tells him to stop making other people's generic genre projects and make something that actually matters to him, something deeply personal.
And Cassavetes recognized the talent, right? But he just saw it being wasted on formulaic material. And that harsh push is what leads directly to Mean Streets in 1973.
Mean Streets is really the crucible.
Yeah. It is where all these disparate elements, the Catholic guilt, the asthma-induced observation, Corman's kinetic pacing, and Cassavetes' demand for personal truth, they all just fuse together.
It's almost like Corman handed him a wrench and said, "Here's how you build an engine." But Cassavetes had to be the one to tell him, "Great, now drive it somewhere that actually matters to you."
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. I mean, Mean Streets has the macho posturing, the explosive violence, the rapid-fire editing, and a soundtrack loaded with contemporary rock music instead of a traditional orchestral score.
Yeah, and the result was the creation of a new Hollywood archetype. Scorsese managed to balance gritty, documentary-style street realism with highly stylized studio aesthetics.
Which is a tough balance.
Very tough. Film critic Pauline Kael famously noted that Mean Streets had a hallucinatory look.
Hallucinatory? What did she mean by that exactly?
Well, by that she meant Scorsese wasn't just pointing a camera at reality like a documentarian. He was heightening it. You know, the dark, claustrophobic bars with their lurid, bleeding red lights, they weren't just set decoration. They were physical manifestations of the character's internal damnation.
Oh, that makes sense. And that hallucinatory style launches him to the absolute top of the industry. By 1976, he directs Taxi Driver, which wins the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival.
A massive achievement.
Huge. It locks in this legendary collaboration with Robert De Niro and writer Paul Schrader. But the film's exploration of alienation and violence, it actually spills over into the real world.
Sadly, yes.
5 years after its release, John Hinckley Jr. attempts to assassinate President Ronald Reagan, and he later claims he was driven by an obsession with Jodie Foster's character in the film.
Yeah. The cultural footprint of his work was becoming seismic. He was tapping into a very dark vein of the American psyche. But internally, the pressure of that success, combined with the sheer excess of 1970s Hollywood...
The drugs.
Right. It was tearing him apart.
Which brings us full circle to that hospital room from the intro. So he tries to pivot away from the grit, right? He directs a massive, big-budget, highly stylized studio musical called New York, New York, starring De Niro and Liza Minnelli.
And it is a critical and commercial disaster.
Total flop. And failure shatters his confidence. He falls into a severe depression, develops a crippling cocaine addiction, and his body eventually just gives out.
Right. He is hospitalized with internal bleeding, hovering near death. And that is the moment De Niro intervenes with the biography of middleweight boxer Jake LaMotta.
De Niro basically challenges him to make Raging Bull. And Scorsese agrees, but he approaches it with what he calls a kamikaze method.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, he is absolutely certain the studios will never let him make another movie after this. So he decides to leave every single ounce of his rage, his guilt, and his cinematic knowledge right on the screen. He uses heavy slow motion, he uses complex tracking shots, and extreme distortions of perspective.
Yeah, when we talk about cinematic expressionism in Raging Bull, we mean the camera is actively warping the environment to put you inside Jake LaMotta's deteriorating mind.
Give me an example of that.
Well, Scorsese actually changed the physical dimensions of the boxing ring from fight to fight.
Wait, literally? He changed the size of the set?
Literally. In one scene, the ring might look as massive and smoky as a football field to emphasize LaMotta's isolation. But then in a later fight, as his life falls apart, the ring is shot to look tiny, claustrophobic, and completely inescapable.
That's brilliant, but it makes me wonder, did the total lack of a safety net actually forge the genius of that film? Like, if he thought he had a long career ahead of him, maybe he compromises. But because he thought he was professionally dead, he takes risks no one else would dare take.
I think that's absolutely true. The near-death experience codified his entire visual language. He wasn't just directing a sports biopic about a boxer. Like we said earlier, he was exercising his own personal demons.
Right.
The crushing male insecurity, the self-destructive violence, the desperate need for punishment as a form of penance that was Scorsese projected onto LaMotta.
Wow.
And the gamble paid off. It won De Niro the Oscar for Best Actor and cemented Scorsese not just as a director, but as a true master of the medium.
Now, you would assume that surviving a brush with death and making a masterpiece would lead someone to play it safe.
You'd think so, yeah.
But instead, Scorsese spends the 1980s and 90s swinging wildly between profound, quiet spiritual explorations and the most visceral underworld epics imaginable. It's this constant tug-of-war between the sacred and the profane.
Exactly. Take 1988, for example. He finally secures the backing for his ultimate passion project, The Last Temptation of Christ. Written again by Paul Schrader, it explores Jesus Christ through a strictly human rather than divine lens. It focuses on his doubts, his fears, and his human desires.
And it triggers a global meltdown.
Oh, massive. There were organized protests worldwide. Some theater chains flat out refused to show it. The controversy primarily centered on a sequence where Jesus, while on the cross, experiences a Satan-induced hallucination.
Okay.
He hallucinates coming down, marrying Mary Magdalene, and living a normal mortal life as a man. Critics called it profound, but religious groups called it blasphemy. It turned an independent, low-budget film into a cultural lightning rod.
And then he faces a totally different kind of institutional fiction a decade later. In 1997, he directs Kundun, which is this gorgeous, trance-like film detailing the early life of the Dalai Lama.
Right.
But it angers the Chinese government so deeply that Disney, who was the film's distributor, faces intense geopolitical pressure, and they actively distance themselves from the project to protect their business interests.
It's crazy. But running parallel to these quiet spiritual battles are his undisputed masterpieces of the modern gangster genre. Goodfellas in 1990 and Casino in 1995.
Wait, let me push back here for a second. We've been talking a lot about Catholic guilt and spiritual weight. But a lot of critics over the years have argued that Goodfellas inherently glorifies the mob.
Yeah, that's a very common critique.
Right. The needle drops, the tailored suits, the camaraderie. People watch that movie and they actively want to be Henry Hill. How does he balance the morality of his Catholic roots when the audience is cheering for Joe Pesci violently destroying a made man?
It's a crucial tension in his work. He seduces the audience with the glamour, the same way a young Henry Hill was seduced by it looking out his window. But Scorsese explains the mechanics of their downfall through his editing.
How so?
Well, take the freeze frames in Goodfellas. When he suddenly pauses the film on a character mid-action, accompanied by Ray Liotta's voiceover, he isn't just making a cool stylistic choice. He is physically trapping that character in a moment of extreme hubris right before their inevitable ruin.
Oh, Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, he built up the adrenaline specifically so you feel the devastating, isolating crash of the third act when the paranoia sets in and the body starts showing up in garbage trucks.
So it's not a glorification at all. It's a trap.
Exactly.
Whether it's the Italian mob in Goodfellas, a Tibetan monastery in Kundun, or the suffocating high society of 1870s New York in The Age of Innocence, he is always studying closed systems.
Spot on. He operates like an anthropologist of subcultures. He examines groups with rigid codes of honor, intense male insecurity, and the violent consequences of breaking those codes. A gangster getting whacked for stepping out of line, and a priest agonizing over theological rules are, to Scorsese, two sides of the exact same psychological coin.
That is fascinating. Take a moment and think about the media you consume today. The complex anti-heroes on television, the morally gray protagonists we all binge-watch, almost all of them owe a structural debt to Scorsese's willingness to make you empathize with deeply compromised people trapped in their own systems. But as we move into the 2000s, we see a massive shift in his career. Scorsese is aging, and he transitions away from his legendary muse, Robert De Niro, to a new one, Leonardo DiCaprio.
And this partnership initiates his most commercially successful era. It finally brings him the long-overdue institutional recognition he had been denied for literally decades.
It kicks off with Gangs of New York in 2002. It's a massive, sprawling $100 million production. And the sources note it was famously troubled, with rumors of intense clashes in the editing room with Miramax boss Harvey Weinstein over the final cut.
Right, but it solidifies DiCaprio as his new anchor. And they followed up with massive hits, The Aviator, Shutter Island, The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
And finally, in 2006, Scorsese wins the Best Director Oscar for The Departed.
The poetry of that specific Academy Award ceremony is hard to script, because the envelope for Best Director was handed to him by his old friends and peers from the 1970s movie brat generation.
Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg.
He takes the award from them, looks at the crowd, and jokes, "Could you double-check the envelope?"
It's brilliant.
It is. But looking at the films themselves, I have a theory about this transition. De Niro, especially in films like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, felt like Scorsese's proxy for pure, explosive id, just raw, street-level emotion.
Yes.
But DiCaprio seems to serve a different purpose. Is DiCaprio his proxy for grand ambition and corrupted authority?
The sources map perfectly to that theory, actually. As Scorsese entered his 60s and 70s, his thematic focus expanded. He was no longer just looking at street-level thugs in Little Italy.
Right.
With DiCaprio, he began exploring institutional, political, and financial corruption on a massive scale. Think about Howard Hughes in The Aviator.
Yeah.
Or Jordan Belfort manipulating the markets in The Wolf of Wall Street.
Or the systemic rot of the Boston police force in The Departed.
Exactly. And eventually the systemic exploitation of the Osage Nation in Killers of the Flower Moon.
So the guilt evolves. It moves out of the alleyways and directly into the boardrooms and the halls of power. DiCaprio represents a sleeker, wealthier, but equally hollow and guilty American archetype.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Which brings us to Scorsese's legacy, his preservation work, and his incredibly surprising future. Even with the Oscar on his shelf, even entering his 80s, he refuses to become a static museum piece.
No, not at all. He has dedicated massive portions of his life to protecting the past. In 1990, he founded the Film Foundation, which is an organization that has successfully restored over 850 decaying films from around the world.
That's incredible.
He later helped launch the African Film Heritage Project to locate, restore, and screen vital cinema from the African continent that was in danger of being lost forever to physical degradation. He is fiercely protective of the tactile history of the medium.
But he is not stuck in the past.
No.
He is incredibly online for a man of his generation. If you look at social media, his daughter Francesca frequently posts videos of him trying to guess modern TikTok slang, which is genuinely charming.
It's so wholesome.
It really is. But there is a detail from the recent sources, dated June 2026, that feels like a massive philosophical pivot.
It does, and it totally recontextualizes how we understand his relationship with technology.
Okay, get this. At 83 years old, Martin Scorsese signs on as an advisor for an artificial intelligence company called Black Forest Labs.
Yeah.
He is utilizing their generative AI technology, specifically their FLUX model, to help storyboard his upcoming film, What Happens at Night.
I know, it sounds crazy.
Hold on, stop. You're telling me the man who fought tooth and nail to preserve physical analog film prints is now collaborating with generative AI. Why? Is he compromising, or is he just the ultimate pragmatist?
I'd argue he is a pragmatist who is loyal to the image, not necessarily the medium. Scorsese explained that a director's most agonizing problem is the friction of communication.
What does that mean?
Well, trying to get the specific, vivid image out of his own head and explain it to a cast and crew so they can build it, that's hard. He views AI storyboarding not as a replacement for human art, but as a high-speed tool to bypass that friction. He has always adopted whatever technology serves the story. He used 3D cameras for Hugo because the story was about the magic tricks of early cinema. He used incredibly complex digital de-aging for The Irishman because he needed to tell a story about regret stretching across 50 years of a man's life.
So the technology is just a faster vehicle to deliver the same old human flaws. The guilt, the insecurity, the spiritual wrestling that remains the core. The tools just change to help him articulate it.
Precisely. The AI doesn't generate the soul of the movie. Scorsese's lifelong obsessions do.
To bring all of this together for you listening, Martin Scorsese is not merely a director of violent mob movies. That is a fundamentally reductive way to view his contribution to art.
Very reductive.
He is American cinema's foremost historian and perhaps its most vital living conscience. He is a lapsed but devout Catholic who couldn't be a priest, so he turned the silver screen into his altar.
And he spent over 6 decades exploring the deepest, darkest, most uncomfortable flaws of the human condition.
Finding the common thread of guilt connecting a lonely taxi driver, the Dalai Lama, and a corrupted stockbroker.
Yeah, he built a revolutionary visual language out of his own near destruction in the 1970s. And he continues to push the absolute boundaries of what cinema can be, simultaneously saving its fragile past while stress testing its digital future.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We have spent this entire deep dive exploring a man whose art is driven by analog, flesh and blood, Catholic guilt. A man who believes you have to physically suffer to earn redemption.
Right.
As we look toward a future generation raised entirely by predictive algorithms and frictionless AI, how will they interpret Scorsese's work? When the struggle is removed from the creative process, will future audiences even be able to comprehend the deeply human idea of suffering for your soul?
That's a huge question.
It's something to think about the next time you sit in the dark and the screen lights up. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away seeing the screen a little differently, and we can't wait to share our next curated exploration with you. Catch you next time.